All right, good evening, everyone. For this rowdy group over here, behave yourselves now. So, most of you know I'm Councillor at Large Winthrop Farwell. Just call me Win. Tonight is like an information and listening session. Somebody asked me, well, why are you doing this? And I said, well, A, I like it. B, I love pizza. But more than that, we've kind of become a society where everybody texts messages and everybody goes on social media and everybody sends emails. We don't connect with each other anymore, and it's really a shame because, especially in government, we're in the people business. So tonight we're going to have pizza and we're going to have salad, and we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Troy Clarkson, our Chief Financial Officer. And the topic I picked this evening happened to be city finances, and that's really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, everything we do is because you pay your taxes. You pay your excise taxes, you pay meals taxes, you pay sales taxes, you pay income taxes, both federal and state. And we get grant money, obviously, from the federal and state government. So you're the reason why we're able to function as a city. And I think we should honor people for that contribution that they make. The second thing is there's a lot of misinformation about what does the council do, what do they know, do we monitor finances, what does the chief financial officer do? So for that reason, we're going to have a little get-together tonight. We'll have a presentation from Troy Clarkson. I do want to mention some people who are here tonight. My colleague, Councillor Jack Lally from Ward 6. We have Councillor Sue McCastro from Ward 4. We have Judy Sullivan from the school committee. We have Tim Sullivan from the school committee. And we have Ulysses Varela from the park commission. He's one of our park commissioners. So it's my pleasure to introduce Troy Clarkson. Troy and I work very closely because of my service as mayor years ago and where the city almost went bankrupt before I was elected. Troy and I are kind of joined at the hip, so we watch each other's back, we take a look at the information that comes in, and we make sure that the city is on a firm financial foundation. So, having said that, Troy, you're up.
Thank you, Councillor. Grateful to be here, and Wynn has prepared an agenda. There's copies there for all of you. We'll loosely go by this, but in the spirit of the sense of connection that Wynn's trying to create, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on any topic focused on finances, but sure, that, and I'll explain what that is during the presentation. So we really want this to be an opportunity for you to engage and learn and share and help us learn. I thought what I'd do, though, before we get into the specific topics that Wynn asked me to talk about, was just to tell you a little bit about myself and how I wound up here. I was actually born here in Brockton. My parents both were born and raised and grew up here. My mom, at the time, was in the last house in Brockton on Plain Street on the Brockton East Bridgewater line. And those of a certain age might remember my grandfather growing strawberries in the backyard and selling them in a fruit stand out front on Plain Street. I spent a lot of time there as a kid. I was joking with somebody at work. I live now on the Cape. And, most people from this area would go down to the Cape for the summer. When I was a kid, I would come here to Brockton and spend time with my grandparents. My dad grew up on Ash Street, just a few houses down from the Dairy Queen. So when I was a young kid, my dad got a job with a bank in Falmouth, which is where I live today. But my grandparents still lived here, so we came back quite often until they moved to Falmouth in with my parents. So Brockton is an important part of my roots and who I am. So when the opportunity came 6 years ago now to work for Mayor Bill Carpenter, I jumped at the opportunity to come back and to contribute to my hometown. So I'm really grateful to come here and work every day. I've spent most of my career in local government before coming to Brockton. I was in a couple of different communities here in Plymouth County as the town manager in Hanover and Bridgewater, and before that was actually the administrator for the Plymouth County government. So my connection to this area, both personally and professionally, go way back. So for the last 6 years, it's been my responsibility to oversee and to manage the finances of the City of Champions. And you know, we raise and spend about $500 million a year. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of responsibility, and it takes a real team to do that. So I'm standing here before you tonight, but I have a staff of hardworking professionals, most of whom live here in the city, that assist me and the city council and the mayor and his team every day in managing the finances, but also sharing information, working with our partners in the state, sometimes even our partners in the federal government. The mayor's talked a lot about the trips that he and I take to Washington to secure funding, and we do that every year, and every time we've gone, it's resulted in millions of dollars in earmarks and funding for the city. So I will go, again, loosely by this agenda. The councillor has asked us to prepare some handouts. All of these pages that you see are from the city's budget book. I brought that along as a little show and tell. So all of the pages that we've printed are from this book. This is a little over 400 pages, and this represents all of the figures for revenues and expenses that are part of this year, fiscal year 2025 budget. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So this represents the money the city is spending for this year up until this coming June 30th. And right now we're in the process of putting together the proposed spending plan that will start this coming July 1st, and that'll be fiscal year 2026. Before I get into the details on the budget, and I'll leave this here if anyone wants to take a look at it, but this is available on the city's website on the finance page. So you can look at that and download it. And it has lots of information, not just the numbers themselves, but narratives that provide the thinking behind the numbers and the numbers behind the numbers. I like to say that a budget is the most important policy statement of a community. In a municipal budget, you get to understand what's important to the people who make decisions. So it's a reflection of the policy priorities of the city council and of the mayor who submits the budget to the city council. So in there, again, is not only an explanation of how we spend the money, but why, and why it's important. So it's something that we're really proud of. Several years ago, this actually started under Mayor Carpenter and continued with Mayor Rodriguez and Mayor Sullivan. A decision was made that we really wanted to take what was then a collection of Excel spreadsheets and really tell the story of Brockton's budget. So we went through a very rigorous process through an organization called the Government Finance Officers Association. That's an international association of municipal finance professionals. This budget reflects those standards, and actually for the last 5 years in a row, we've won their top award for transparency by producing this budget. So it's something that you really can dig into if you're so inclined. But it really tells the story of Brockton and how we spend your public funds. So given that introduction about the budget itself, I'll share with you the sheets that you have before you, and these are ones that Wynn picked out, just to sort of give a snapshot of what's in that big binder. So the first is an overview of the FY25 estimated revenue. So again, FY stands for fiscal year. That's the year we're in. This is what was presented to the City Council last June. So last June, this was our estimate of the revenues that we would take in for the year to support the budget. And as you can see by looking at that, available funds are funds that are on hand. Those are reserve funds or other monies that we have that we can put towards the budget. Local receipts makes up a pretty good chunk. The local receipts are licensing fees and building permit fees and, parking ticket fees So all those local fees that that make up that figure, and the breakdown of these obviously are all in the book, and we monitor these on a monthly basis, and I now provide that update every month to the City Council. Where are we at this month with our projected revenues and with our projected expenses? By far, the largest portion of our receipts, as you can see, is the state aid. So that's primarily what's called Chapter 70, or public education aid. But also the state provides direct aid to the city. It provides direct aid for libraries, for veteran services. So all in total, the amount of state aid is almost $300 million. And then the tax levy. So that's the direct result of you paying your property taxes and your personal property taxes. Do you want me to take questions as we go, or wait? It's up to you. The question was, what is Chapter 70? Good question. So when you hear the term Chapter 70, that is just public education aid. The aid that's directly to the city, you might hear that called lottery aid. For those of us that have been around for a while, that's what it used to be called, because that was money that came from the state lottery. It's now called unrestricted general government aid, or UGGA. So that's money that the state gives the city for its operations. But out of that $289 million, and again, the breakdown you can get online in the book, but overwhelmingly most of that is that Chapter 70 school aid. And then the tax levy, again, that's your property taxes, what's called personal property taxes. If you have a second home, you actually get taxed on the contents of it, or businesses get taxed on their equipment, and that's what rolls into what's called personal property taxes. And so that's what makes up that $517 million in estimated aid. We then have, on the next page, a similar pie chart and a breakdown. That's the proposed expenditures. So this is the figure that the City Council got last June that they then discussed and voted on. And as you can see, that this is a broad breakdown of those categories, but the book, again, provides much more detail on the specific spending. We list every employee, the electricity costs, our bonding costs, and we can talk about that a little later. The city borrows money to build things and to do things. The principal and interest costs are outlined in this budget. One important point, if you'll notice, the education number in this graph is just over $250 million. The state aid is $289 million. The reason for that is some of that Chapter 70, or education aid, is not spent directly on the school budget, because all of the health insurance for school employees is reflected in the city's budget. In this case, it's in different cities and towns, it's done differently. In Brockton, that's reflected in the human resource budget. So when you look at the detail in the book or online, you'll see the HR budget is over $60 million. That's large for a fairly small department that only employs a handful of people, but it's because all the health insurance for the entire city is reflected in that budget. And so that's some of the nuances of a municipal budget that's this big and this complicated. But when you hear Judy and Tim talking about those things at school committee meetings, and talking about things like you hear the term Schedule 19 or allowable costs, those terms, that's all related to the costs that the city has to support public education, but aren't necessarily directly reflected in the school budget. So you also see in that list general government, which again there's a breakdown, but that's the mayor's office and my office and some of the other, just what you would call in a private company the back office support. Public safety, of course, is generally police and fire, but that's also Brockton Emergency Management, Animal Control, DPW, a lot of money spent, and these are all general fund, by the way. We'll talk about enterprise funds in a minute too if we have time. So those are all the costs. reflected for how we spend that $517 million. One more note on this. You see that retirement at $14 million. If you look at past year's budgets, and those are available on the website as well, if you go back 3 or 4 years, you'll see that that retirement cost was over almost $30 million, and now it's down to 14. That's because with the support of the City Council, we went out a few years ago and actually borrowed $300 million to fully fund our public pension system. We pay the Brockton Retirement Board a number every year that's equal to both the amount that we're paying out to current retirees and the amount that we will owe to future retirees, and that's a calculation done by actuaries. Well, we realized several years ago that that number was escalating at such an alarming rate that between, say, 2021 and 2040, that number was going to more than double, from around $30 million to around $60 million. And so that would have to be absorbed in the city's budget, which means that some of these other functions would have to be cut. So by borrowing the money to fully pay, almost fully fund, we're about 91% funded in the retirement system. But by borrowing the money and giving that money to the retirement board, it reduced our annual liability. And when you put together that annual liability plus the principal and interest, it's less than what we would have paid if we had done nothing. So it sounds crazy, but actually by borrowing $300 million, we saved approximately $90 million over the next 15 years. Why that's important? Well, first of all, because we saved $95 million. But when we finally went to build the public safety building, most communities in Massachusetts, when they go to build buildings, one's a lot smaller than that, they have to then go borrow the money, but ask the taxpayers to exempt that borrowing from Proposition 2.5. Proposition 2.5 is a law that's been around since the early 80s, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I'll just go through it very briefly. That law says that you can increase property taxes by no more than 2.5% every year. There are some exceptions to that. One of them is called a debt exclusion, and that means the voters agree to increase the taxes that we're going to collect to pay the debt on a specific project, a police station, a fire station, a school. And then when that project is paid off, the taxes come back down. There's also something you probably hear a lot about in the news these days, and that's called an override. That's different than a debt exclusion because an override increases taxes forever, and they don't come down. Right now, approximately 60 communities in Massachusetts, so about almost a fifth of 20% of the communities in Massachusetts are looking at overrides in the spring elections. The major driving force behind those overrides is that many communities spent their pandemic relief money from the federal government on plugging holes in their budgets. That is something that this mayor and this city council didn't want to do. And I think it was a very wise decision. So what we did with that pandemic relief money was invest it in the city and in the infrastructure, in the things we haven't had the opportunity to invest in a very long time. So you see the scaffolding around the city hall, that's getting a brand new HVAC, fresh air system that it hasn't had in 175 years. For those of you that have been to the War Memorial, that building was renovated. The Cosgrove Pool is a brand new pool for the residents of Brockton. Parks and playgrounds in each ward of the city were renovated. And so we really made a commitment to investing in the city, in all of you, rather than plugging holes in the budget. And we're now reaping those rewards because we're not asking you for an override to raise your taxes even more than they already are. And that's really important. So going back to the savings from the pension bond, we were able to use those savings and without a debt exclusion, borrow the $98 million that was the initial tranche of money to build the brand new public safety building. So we did that, what's called within the levy limit. That amount that you see on that page, that's the maximum amount that we can tax the taxpayers of Brockton. And that's set by the Commonwealth every year. And so if you're going to borrow money, the principal and interest to pay that back has to be within that number. We were able, because of the savings from the pension bond, to be able to pay those costs without raising taxes. That is an extraordinary event that usually doesn't happen in communities, particularly a project of that size. One of the other things that we did, and these are the kinds of decisions that we work on and discuss with the City Council, and you may not see it on Facebook or read it in the Enterprise, but we made a decision, usually with a project like that, construction's over a few years, so you borrow the money as you need it over a few years. We made a decision to borrow it all at once, to take advantage of what were then really competitive interest rates. So that $98 million we borrowed, our interest rate is less than 3%. It sounded okay then, but right now, today, that sounds pretty good. We were able to do that and lock in those interest rates. Now, that meant we had to start paying the debt, but the advantage is that we saved what is, over the long term of that project, millions of dollars in interest costs. And again, so these are a lot of the decisions that we talk about and the research that we conduct that doesn't wind up necessarily in the public discourse, but why I think what Wynn is doing here tonight is so important, because it really gives you a window into the work that we do every day. The next page is a further breakdown by department of how that money is distributed. And when we get to the questions, I'm happy to answer questions on any of these departments. But again, all of the information is provided in that book. And then, because public safety is so vitally important and is probably the most solemn responsibility of government, we gave you a breakdown of those costs. And it's notable because if you see the fire proposed at $37 million and the police department proposed at $34 million, those numbers are very close to what the City Council actually voted. But individually, each of those departments, those budgets are larger than many communities in Massachusetts, larger than a whole town budget. And so just the size and scope of the work that we do here is huge and incredibly complex. So I think that's why it requires having a city council like we have, that's engaged, that does their homework, and that asks tough questions on your behalf. So one of the things that the councilor asked me to talk about was the multiple layers of review for revenues and expenditures. So right now, actually today, I had several meetings with department heads who were proposing their budget for next year. So the first stop in that journey is my office, and my team and I sit down. Our budget director, who lives here in Brockton, her name is Elvira Lopes, and a financial analyst from my team. We sit down with the department heads, we review their proposed spending. After that meeting, we talk about it. We may make some changes. We then schedule a meeting with the mayor and the department head, and he reviews those recommendations. He may make some further changes, and then we put the final budget together and send it to the city council. We usually get these books to them a couple of weeks before their first hearing, so they have the chance to review it and ask any questions. And then we spend a marathon week of hearings at night where those same department heads come back and appear before the city council, and they get to ask questions. All of those meetings are open to the public. Every year there's also a public forum where the public is welcomed to come in and provide commentary on the overall budget. In addition to all of that work, the Commonwealth, the Department of Revenue, works very closely with us, and we have meetings with them all of the time. We're in constant contact with them, and so there are multiple levels of review on an ongoing basis, multiple levels of scrutiny to these expenditures. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we also produce a monthly report that gives an update for actual spending in each of the departments and our projected revenues in each of those categories, and we now send that on a monthly basis to the city council. All of those reports, anything that we send to the city council, any email is a public document. Any citizen is welcome. In fact, I encourage welcome well-informed citizens like Jamal Brathwaite who do their homework, hold us accountable, and ask questions. That's the kind of engagement that my team and I want. So those multiple levels and layers of review result in a budget that looks like that can get an award because it's so detailed. So that's related to the next topic of the comprehensive financial reports. Like I said, we created those during my tenure here. It's something I've done just about every place I've worked, and worked with our financial team. And we have a team of financial leaders in addition to myself, our assessor, John O'Donnell, auditor, Irene Giannopoulos, our treasurer-collector, Marty Brophy. They all have many, many years of experience in public finance. Just today, Marty Brophy led a team of folks that auctioned off public property. Happy to report that the gross revenue from those auctions was about $1.4 million. And those are properties that the city generally has taken in what's called tax title. So if you don't pay your taxes, the government has a right to take your property because you didn't pay your taxes. It doesn't happen that often, but there were several properties that we own, some single-family homes, that were taken by the city for non-payment of taxes. And so they're much more useful to us back on the tax rolls with people living in those houses. So we had an auction today and raised about $1 million that will be part of this year's general revenue. I mentioned the collaboration with the Department of Revenue, but this is an important point. It's no secret to everyone that in August of 2023, it was revealed that the school department had incurred a pretty significant deficit. From that day to this, our collaboration with the Department of Revenue increased significantly. Just this morning, we were in a meeting with something called the Municipal Finance Oversight Board, or MFOB. The MFOB is a state agency that actually, at the request of cities and towns, can back municipal debt. And so we went before the MFOB today for the additional debt on the public safety building and the initial debt for the high school project. That's $2.5 million to do what's called a feasibility study. But we went before the MFOB today and asked them if they would back our debt, meaning the full faith and credit of both the Commonwealth and the city of Brockton is behind that debt. They had a unanimous vote to support that. But my point is, in the car ride on the way in from the Cape, I was on the phone with the Department of Revenue explaining to them what our plan is for paying back that debt. Because it's not just about borrowing it. We then have to have the revenue somewhere within this $500 million to pay the principal and interest. So that's the level to which they're engaged. The good news is there was a person from the DOR on that MFOB board, and they, along with their colleagues, voted to support it because we do our homework and we're able to provide them our plans on how we're going to pay that debt. I think it's instructive to demonstrate to you how we do things around here. I'll give you the answer to that question because, again, as many of you know, the initial debt for that public safety building was $98 million. As the project progressed, as unfortunately many around the Commonwealth had, the per square foot construction price during the pandemic skyrocketed. That was not anticipated when the project began. In addition, those of you that have been here for a while and remember the old high school used to be 2 buildings. One of them was still standing. One of them was underground. So when that first building was knocked down, it was buried on site. That created some significant challenges and additional costs to remove all that. It's no longer just lumber. It's considered hazardous and had to be remediated. So that increased those costs pretty significantly. And so that's the debt that we brought before the MFOB today. It was $48 million in additional debt that was approved by the City Council. But I'm sure the question that you have as taxpayers is similar to the question the DOR had. Well, how are you going to pay for it? If we just paid for it within this number of the budget, that would mean we would have to sacrifice other services. So that amount of debt, depending on interest rates, could be $3 to $4 million a year in principal and interest costs. So what we do, and what I do particularly on a regular basis, is meet with our finance advisors, with our bond underwriters, so those are the folks that actually take our debt to market, with finance professionals, with actuaries, and we look at not only what our debt is today, but what it'll be 15 years from now, and try to plan ahead to manage that debt effectively. So the plan for this particular debt for the public safety building, as I'm sure all of you know, the City Council recently passed an overlay zoning district for the fairgrounds, and that there will be some housing development and maybe some commercial development there. We've done an analysis and anticipate that the additional revenue to the city from the development there could be as much as $5 to $8 million a year in new revenue. And so we're going to, this $48 million, we will borrow it, but we'll pay it back. We'll do what's called temporary borrowing. With public debt, you can borrow temporarily and only pay interest for up to 10 years. That flexibility will allow us to temporarily borrow this money until there's additional tax revenue from that property, and then we'll be able to pay that again without raising property taxes. So that's always, here more than any place I've worked or lived, the underlying goal is always to keep those expenses as low as possible, recognizing that there's not an unlimited source of funds from the taxpayers. In addition to all of that scrutiny by the City Council and the Department of Revenue, our budget and our finances are also audited every year by an outside auditor. For the City of Brockton right now, that's a company called Clifton Larson Allen, or CLA. And so they conduct an additional audit, as they do for every community in Massachusetts. Not CLA, but there's a professional audit firm, and it's a requirement of the law to have an audit every year. And so that's an additional layer of scrutiny and analysis that the auditors conduct every year, and those audits are also available on the website. And finally, so from year to year, the numbers change pretty significantly. And so again, we're in a process right now where we're looking at the fiscal year that starts July 1st, what are the spending priorities? What are the revenues to support those spending priorities? And how do we construct a budget that both meets our needs but also stays affordable? That is a huge challenge, and it is every year. I like to say a budget is like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to put the pieces together so that they fit. The revenues have to be responsible and realistic. Some communities will estimate their spending and then estimate the revenues to meet that spending. Now imagine if you did that in your own home budget, right? You said, well, I'd like, I drive a Chevy, I'd like to drive a Cadillac, so I'm going to estimate my income to meet the car payment for a Cadillac, right? It doesn't work that way. Some communities do that and they get into trouble. We have historically, even before I came here, always estimated the revenues very conservatively and then created a budget to meet those revenues. Here's why that approach is so critical. When the school deficit hit, we were estimating our revenues so conservatively that we were able to increase those estimates by $10 million during that year, still make those very realistic and help address the school deficit, because we were able to have those $10 million in revenue count for that year. And so that is a real advantage of a very conservative approach when it comes to revenues. Now, we've had to keep those estimates up at that same level the last couple of years to meet those ongoing challenges, but it was that approach that we had that really allowed us to survive that existential threat to our financial security. So that's generally the topics that Wynn asked me to cover, but I think
there's one thing I want to say about Troy that makes my job a lot easier, and that is that since the school department challenges came forth, every single month I get a printout, and I think it's 100 pages, if I'm not mistaken, between municipal and school finances. And it's a mathematical exercise, but it's so perfect because, take for example, March 31st. That means we are 75% through the fiscal year. We've completed 9 months of the fiscal year. We have 3 months left. So on the right-hand column, for every single department and every single line item, including the school department and broken down by school, so that I can tell how the principals are perhaps handling their budget, I can look, and if I see something in red, the first week in April, that means someone has gone over that 75%. That means that someone has spent in excess of what we ordinarily would expect them to spend for something. Now, in some cases, it's unavoidable. For example, if we have a contract with a special ed school for some of our students, we may pay that 3 times a year. So we may expend a little bit more than 75% for a special ed program or for software or something like that. But if I looked at, for example, fire department salaries, and I saw that as of March 31st, we had spent 95% of the salaries that were appropriated for the fire department, a huge red flag would go up. We would, as a council, approach the mayor and the CFO and we would say, what gives here? We have to go back in and we have to find out why that's happening. And for him to begin that process, which makes it easier for us, because we're part-time counselors, to be able to sit down and look at that document and study it and analyze it and look at it again to make sure I know what I'm looking at and that I understand what's happening. That is a level of accountability that I think you absolutely have to have in every community. And I thank you for that, because really without that, you'd pass the budget, you'd figure the department heads were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And even though all of us are friendly, look, Troy and I are very friendly, but I'm going to hold him accountable for his work. And I'm going to oversee what he does. And I'm going to double check what he sends to me, because we're all in this together. And if we don't do that, you could miss something, I might pick up on it. I could miss something, you'll pick up on it. But hopefully together, we'll make sure that the city is in good financial standing and that we're managing people's money wisely. So I appreciate the collaboration, I really do. And I think it works out well, so.
Thank you very much, Win. And he raises a couple of good points, and that is, you as taxpayers have the same ability, and I would suggest the same responsibility as Win has as a counselor, to hold people like me accountable, to ask tough questions, to make sure that we're doing our jobs, and that you're getting accurate information. That's really important, because particularly today, I got involved in public service more than 30 years ago when I got elected to the select board in Falmouth when I was in my early 20s, and it was just a different time. There was no social media. You discussed and debated things and sometimes disagreed, and then went out and had a couple of beers and everybody got along. It's different, and I think social media in many ways has changed the way that people participate in their governments. This is a personal opinion, but I'm going to say to you that what you're doing right now is civic engagement. What you're doing right now is participating in your government. Posting about someone on Facebook is not necessarily the same level of engagement and involvement in your government. So I mean this very sincerely. I applaud all of you for what you're doing. And in recognition of that relationship that Wynn talked about, that reporting is so important, because a budget is not a static document, right? It's not like architectural plans for a building where you draw them up and you stick to it because that's how it has to be. A budget is a flexible, living document, because at the beginning of the year it says what the priorities are, the plans are for the government. But it never ever works out exactly as you planned. There's always things that happen in a budget where you have to be nimble and flexible. So that's why you see me going before the city council throughout the year for transfers, because we estimated we'd need $50,000 here But as it turned out, because of maybe people retired or people left for another job, we have a little extra money here, and maybe we need more money here. I'll give you an example from yesterday. Small budget, but provides a lot of service. The animal control budget right now has a couple of vacancies. And animal control is one of those departments that you have to provide the service, right? If you call them, they have to come. They can't say, well, we're down a couple of people, we'll see you in a week, right? And so when we're down people, then we're saving those full-time salaries, but we need to spend money in overtime. Overtime is one of those categories that is a separate, what we call statutory category. So overtime is in its own category. And the reason for that is those monies, if we're going to exceed that amount, we have to go to the city council and ask them to transfer money to go there. And all of that is done in the light of day. All of those transfers are done at finance committee meetings and then voted after that by the full city council in Brockton. The finance committee and the full council are the same body. In other communities, it's different. Let me talk about that just very briefly, because Brockton, as I'm sure you know, has had different forms of government over the years. And even city forms of government can vary. This particular form of government we have is a strong council and what's called a weak mayor. The mayor is still the CEO of the community, but in this form of government is required to go before the city council for things that in other forms of government he or she may not. Worcester, for example, has a mayor, but the mayor is elected from the city councilors, not from the general public. And they have a city manager who is the CEO who manages the city on a day-to-day basis. In Fall River, just a few miles from here, they have a mayor, but then they have a full-time city administrator who acts in that CEO capacity. So the form of government is very different depending on where you go, even within the Commonwealth. Towns are the same. The town in which I live, Falmouth, has a town manager, and a town meeting acts as the legislative body, much like the city council. Those folks are elected. So 240 or so people are elected by the general public to go to that town meeting. In other towns, like Hanover, where I worked before I came here, town meeting is open, so any registered voter can show up at town meeting and vote on important things like the budget. So the form of government is different wherever you go. And I mention that to you folks because you clearly are interested or you wouldn't be here. And so how things get done in this form of government is different here than it is in other places. So paying attention and understanding those nuances and where and at what time your voice should be heard is really important. So with that, I'd like to follow the proposed agenda and give the rest of the time to all of you for us to have a real dialogue, to answer any questions. And like I said, tonight's focus is finance, but if you have questions on other topics, if I can't answer them, I'm certain that Councillor Farwell or Councillor Nicastro or Councillor Lally could certainly answer them. Or if we can't, then we'll get back to you. But okay, well, she gets to go first then.
She is a constituent.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Gentlemen, this is my question. You mentioned today, Mr. Clarkson, meeting with department heads about their proposed budgets for FY26. When you're gathering budgets from departments, and I know you work with most of the departments on it, the budget is a desired budget, right? But ultimately, what comes before the council is something that you and the mayor decide the city can afford. The council has been accused of not funding some department budgets appropriately, when in fact we can only act on what is submitted to us by the mayor and by you. Would you speak to that?
Excellent question. Very good question. Let me speak first to the second half of the councilor's question, because as the legislative body, the city council has very specific authority when it comes to the budget. The city council can, and oftentimes does, decrease the request that comes from the mayor. The city council cannot, in any circumstances, increase. So if you're a big supporter of our Council on Aging. And hopefully you're enjoying that beautiful renovated senior center that we also paid for with the federal COVID relief funds. The budget that the city council gets is all that they can vote on, and they can reduce that. But even if all of 11 of them unanimously support additional funding for the Council on Aging, they don't have the ability to increase that budget. So that's a really important fact to know when you see their city council hearings. And the first point is an excellent one as well, because that's, and when I compare the budget to a jigsaw puzzle, I don't mean in any way to minimize its complexity or its importance, but it really is, we need to fit together the asks from all of the department heads with the available revenues. We simply, like I said before, can't set revenues based on what we want to spend. We have to set revenues based on what we have to spend. And sometimes that means reducing the requests from the individual departments. And that's not always easy. I am a huge fan and supporter of public libraries. I believe that libraries are the heart of a community. Even in today's technological age, where a lot of people read books, on Kindles and things, I think libraries are still the heart of a community where you can go and learn and engage. And this library in particular offers so much more than books. I would love to fund that library at 10 times what we fund it, but you have to craft those budgets based on the funds that are available, and that sometimes makes for difficult decisions that recommendations that I make to the mayor about funding, and then ultimately that budget that's submitted to the city council is his budget. Eliza. So the question was, could we talk about Munis? And it's something you hear a lot about. Munis is the accounting system that the city uses to keep track of all of the revenues and all of the spending. I've been in public life, as I said, for 30 years, an executive for about the last 20. I would say that Munis is the best system that's out there. It's not perfect. There are others. Like so many things in the corporate world today, there have been smaller companies that have been gobbled up by Munis. So there are other finance softwares available. I remember when I first started out, there were communities that were actually managing their finances in Excel, which is particularly when you're spending $500 million, right? It's not advisable. So it's not perfect, but it is, I believe, the best that's out there. However, and you'll hear this during the budget hearings, I don't believe that we in Brockton have utilized it to its full potential. And so right now, for instance, all of the files, all of the storage for the backup is on servers. Now, a good part of the planet stores their information on servers. It's not a bad thing, but we have the opportunity to store information today on the cloud. It's more expensive, but it's worth it, and that gives us flexibility that we don't have. There's also different components of Munis, that software. For instance, there's what they call modules. Modules that help us better manage our HR function. There's modules that help you manage permitting. And so one of the things we've done during my tenure and are now doing very closely with the school department is looking at ways that we can use Munis that helps us be more efficient. And this is something we don't think about, right? One of the challenges technologically between the city and the school department is some organizations are based in Microsoft, others are based in Google. The city and the schools have different bases. We can still communicate with one another, but sometimes that means sharing information is more of a challenge. So, you know, one of the ways that we could improve on that is, again, having our Munis stuff up in the cloud. It's accessible equally to everybody. So it's a great question, because again, I think these are things we don't get to talk about at city council meetings, and it gives you a sense of the depth to which we analyze and try to improve things. Mrs. Henson.
About the, like, public safety costs and potential costs for, whatever project is fairground. How concerned are you guys about the increase in the costs of steel and how that may impact construction costs? How, I'm sorry.
Oh, you didn't hurt me at all. It's a tough question that I have been pondering, and this is not a political answer. I think it's an honest assessment of where we're at and where our economy is at. It's a tough question to answer, because you see the volatility in the stock market just in the last few days with discussions about things like tariffs. It makes it extremely difficult for us to project cost for things like a new high school, and that's potentially a $700 million project. And we won't have shovels in the ground for 2.5 to 3 years from now. So that sort of volatility makes it very, very difficult to predict. So the most honest answer is I don't know. And anyone that tells you that they do know, I'd sort of, you know, give them a stink eye, because I'm not so sure that that's accurate.
I have something to say. It's kind of more of a statement. We're talking about finances and budgets and, you know, our money, where our money is going to. Well, we have a lot of nepotism and cronyism, which is prohibited by law. You people, a lot of you people all grew up together. I know for a fact there's husbands and wives and brothers and sisters all in, and they may not be suitable for the job, but you're not giving anybody else a chance. And there's been lawsuits against the city of Brockton because people have applied for jobs and they didn't get it, even though they had more experience, probably because your brother or your sister was appointed for the job. It needs to stop. It's prohibited by law. I already know some people, and I'm gonna end up reporting it and exposing it. There is somebody in the school committee who had a position created for his spouse. It needs to stop. That's where a lot of our money is going to.
So, yeah, well, actually, happy to have you ask a question, but let me address the statement first. And as I said earlier, I'm happy to answer anything, including questions that are non-financial. You are absolutely correct. There are laws that protect communities and taxpayers in Massachusetts against things like nepotism. However, I will tell you that there are also laws that allow for family members to be employed, as long as they do what's called make disclosures or file paperwork with the State Ethics Commission. So just as a for instance, and not just here in Brockton, in my experience throughout the Commonwealth, the fire service is a career that winds up sometimes generations of families choose to serve honorably and work in the fire service. So you see, not just here in Brockton, but I think in every community where I've worked, and certainly where I live, you will have fathers and sons and mothers and family members who work for the same municipality, sometimes in the same department. And that's okay as long as they follow the law and they make those disclosures. So if you're aware of circumstances, though, of other instances where those disclosures have not been made or the law is not being followed, I will gladly follow up on that.
And I do want to say something else, because you brought it up, the deficit with the school. You people knew about the deficit, I believe, in 2022, saying that you didn't know until it was announced in August. I can't remember, 2023, or I can't remember exactly when. But there was an audit done, and on one of the pages, it actually said the mayor and yourself took a hands-off approach, which, I'm sorry, it doesn't look good on me the way I look at you.
Well, and so here's the beauty of what we're doing here tonight. Nobody asked all of you to come in this room and agree with everything I said. And I actually encourage disagreement. I will honestly and respectfully, but vehemently disagree with the statement that you just made. There's been a lot of discussion, not all of it constructive, on that school deficit. I can assure you as I stand here today that in August of '23, when the superintendent and the school CFO came to us and revealed that deficit, that was the first time that I was aware of that. If you don't believe that statement, there's not a lot I can do about it, but I can tell you with every fiber of my being, how I was raised as a Brocktonian was to be honest, and that's what I'm being. But I don't deny you anytime, ever, the ability to form your own educated opinion and share that as part of good government. That's what we're all here for.
Well, I will say that listening to you today regarding the public safety building, that was really smart to borrow all that with just that percentage of interest on it. I want to say that that was a really good decision.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Someone.
Just in answer to the young lady's comment, and I've been in Brockton politics for a long while. I think part of the problem in this city is we became so familiar with people that we trusted whatever they said, whatever they did, and we didn't hold them accountable. And you may remember a few minutes earlier, as friendly as Troy and I are, and I know his wife, I watch over his shoulder, and I look at what he sends me for information, and I double check it, and I verify it. Sometimes one of the people he works with in the state, I worked in state government with this gentleman, Sean, years ago. You have to hold people accountable, just like you hold your own children accountable. You love them. They tell you one thing, oh, I'm doing great in history, I'm going to get an A. Yeah, well, show me the homework. Show me the progress reports. And we didn't do that in this city, and we kind of lurched forward, trusting everyone. And I fear what happened to Troy and to the mayor, and maybe even some of the school committee members, and Tim is still here. They trusted what was being told to them, but they never double-checked and verified. And I don't find it, all of you should hold me accountable for what I do. And I don't find it offensive if you question a vote or ask me, well, why the hell did you do that when? It's okay. That's how we learn. And we have learned a bitter lesson in this city that as friendly as you are with people, even people you might have grown up with, people you went to school with, hold people accountable. Ask the right questions. Challenge them. And if they're offended by it, then maybe they shouldn't be in the position they're in. I mean, it's just that simple. And I'm not trying to be a hard person about it, but it's just the way I feel. Hold people accountable. I do it with kids and grandkids. I'm sure as hell I'm going to do it with city officials.
Sir, over here.
Hi, I know many of you. Hi, Jen, I'm going to talk to you next week. My name is Stapleton, and I teach at South Junior High. And what we don't have enough of, and this is more of a comment than a question, but I'll get to the question at the end, is a can-do attitude. So at South a couple of years ago where I teach, we started an organization. Susan's husband is one of the key people involved with us. We've raised about $75,000. We just got a grant yesterday from the state for $21,000. We provided 1,000 books by the end of the school year. We pay for field trips, dances, scholarships. We're going to have a 70th birthday party for school. We got a 3rd annual gala coming up and a 5th Hall of Fame we're going to put in this year. But it's a can-do attitude. So the people who help out, and maybe we're a smaller group. Maybe we need to grow our information society better. We don't get enough people involved in the city. I didn't know about this till Eliza sent me something tonight. I just came from the gym. I'm standing over here because I'm so sweaty and smelly. I don't want to lose any support. They can say, geez, don't help. But actually, we call our organization at South Opportunity and Achievement Plan. So And I'm thinking, wow, I need soap right now, different type of soap. But anyway, one thing we don't have, and I'm gonna be asking the school committee next week, so any support you can, help us out at South. We don't have libraries. So you mentioned libraries. Our kids, 70% of our kids do not speak English at home. They want to learn. And we lost our libraries in all 4 Compass schools. Now, we lost them in 2005. It's going to be 20 years. It was a 2005-06 school year. We lost them. So we compete. They always talk about literacy being important, and that is true. I coached college basketball for 24 years at Massasoit. I can't imagine if they said to me, let's get better this year at shooting, but here's a golf ball, go practice. Our kids need books. We provided 1,000 this year, but we raised the money for that. Our kids need books, and in a budget of $500 million, to get 4 librarians, 1 for each school, would cost us less than $400,000. So all I'm asking, in some way, the school committee, the city council, the CFO, the CEO, everybody, find $400,000. North, east, south, and west need a librarian, need books, need access to the kids. And once we start to achieve, again, we develop a better sense of community, a bigger sense of pride. We all have our boxes, we all want to do well, sitting over here, but we need to provide everyone the opportunity. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for all. I just had to say that. Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Jim, I think, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently they didn't spend $7 million in net school spending. It's got to be spent this year now. That's the state law. If you don't spend it in 1 year, you have to make up for that in the next year. So if the $7 million left on the table, I mean, I would get together with your colleagues and say, listen, let's loosen up some of that money. Let's spend it for the right reasons.
Well,
because that's just crazy.
yeah, I'll be there next week. I got to talk to Tim and the whole committee, and hopefully they will, because they are supportive. We're all working together. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say the school committee's evil. They're working with us. They do what they can with what they have. You know, no one is an evil person here. The city doesn't, you know, we're not run by these dictators. Right. And by the way, as much as I thank Susan and her husband John, you've been a great supporter too, Win. So I know that, and you always have. Thank you.
Is there a statutory requirement that the proposed budget, the upcoming budget, 2026, be made available to the public at any point before it's presented to the council so that we can look at it ourselves? And is there a statutory mandatory open hearing for the public, for voters to come in and hear your discussions before voting?
The answer is yes to both of those. And it's different for, again, depending on the form of government, but here, there is a requirement that the, and I'm just trying to think of the specific number of days, slipping my mind, but there is a requirement for the budget to be submitted to the legislative body, the city council, a certain number of days before the end of the fiscal year. That has happened, at least in the 6 years that I've been here, every year. And when that's done, that makes it a public document. And what we have done is post it. When those budget books are delivered to the city council, that budget is posted on the website and is accessible to the public. And then at the beginning of the budget hearings, there is a public hearing where the input from the public is encouraged. But as I said before, in the intervening 11 months, the Finance Committee meets twice a month, and they're dealing with that living, breathing budget document. Those meetings are also open to the public, and the input is encouraged. And I've met in my office with many of the people in this room, and I for one, encourage, even beyond that, if you have the time and the inclination, to come on in, and we can review some of the information or questions that you have. And I'll make that offer tonight. I try to be very accessible, and so I love attending meetings like this because it gives you a window into the work that we do. And anyone that wants to come in and take a look at this year's or propose next year's budget, happy to.
Where do we find you if we want to come and visit?
My office is in City Hall, and I just returned to the basement. That was not a punishment. So the building is being renovated. For the first time in 175 years, there will be fresh air in that building, air quality. Some of the folks who work with us are here in this room. And so if you go into that, what's Chief of Staff City Mara calls the garden entrance, that ground floor entrance, you go right in and go to the right, and you'll see the sign that says finance. I'm also, if you go on the website to the finance office, there's click a link to send me an email. I think the phone number to the office is there. I didn't bring any business cards with me, but I'm easy to get a hold of. Hi.
I've been in this city 20 years now, right? I've seen it come and go. I haven't seen a lot of improvement. I'm going to be honest with everybody. I mean, money we're dishing out, you know? I don't know what the audit did, because I don't think they were very thorough. I watch a lot of finance meetings. I watch everything. I swallow all of it. I know the city's in debt for $800 million close to it, all right, that we owe other people. We have a budget every year, $5 million. You know, so my conception is, what did you do with these audits? Because I read all the audits. No, I haven't heard a city council talk about it at all. I hear about this munis that's supposed to be broken down, everything's supposed to be categorized. When I watch the finance committees, I'm like, oh, we'll talk to you later about it. I'll get the answer to you later. I'm like, why is it later if you have a laptop right in front of you? All you gotta do is hit the keys. The finance committee people are there, yeah, the regular city, council meeting guys, and they should understand what's going on. They go through all these vendors. Last year was January, they had 500 and something pages to go through, and they got it like 3 or 4 days before that. I'm like, what are you doing? Then you hear the vendors, Amazon. I'm like, what's going on here? Why do we have so many vendors in the city? I mean, we have good, solid companies that work in the city that we can provide work to these people. W.B. Mason, we have those people. We have all that stuff. Why are we sending stuff to people's personal homes? And I know that for a fact. And, that's what upsets me. I'm paying so much out of my hard-earned money. I should have golden roads by now, platinum sidewalks. Like the Brockton High School went right to the trash. Right to the trash. I think all America's education went to the trash. So I'm just speaking for my own behalf. I'm here for a reason, because you guys keep on taking this out of my pocket. When I back down the street, I have to change my ball joints out, my shocks out every year. It's coming out of my pocket again. I seen the public, I appreciate all Brockton. I don't want to slam nobody. I'm not here to slam nobody. But my finances started. I know what my budget is. I don't have a munis. I have a piece of paper and a pencil. I know what my paycheck is. I can break it down. You guys had $3-4 million worth of audits. What the hell did that occur? We found out some teacher was raping a girl, this and that. We didn't have a thorough investigation. We paid millions and millions of dollars for all this stuff, and nobody's broken it down. I've talked to numerous councilors. I said, you know what? Let's stop all the BS. You guys talk about DOI. I was in the military. I was in the government. I understand how the branches go. Why don't we call the state auditor in and check all the books and cancel everything out? Call it all out. Blank it out. So we stop chasing this dog around all day. Because that's what you're doing. You're chasing a dog around. You're chasing that dollar bill around all day long. Oh, we got deficit here. Talking about $10 million deficit in the school again. We got transportation. We block buses. We can't even control the buses. Come on now. This is out of control. I got 2 cars in my driveway. I put tickets on them. I do everything I got to do. I got old cars, and I'm still paying $60, $70 a year for an old, beat-up car. If I had a brand new car, I'd pay $300, $400. For what? So I can destroy it again? Come on now. My taxes keep going up. I don't see no difference. I take care of my street. I have to call people when they plow my street, because I'm on a horseshoe. The guy just takes the plow and jams it in the corner. Now I can't even see. I can't even go nowhere. I blow my street down. I take care of all my stuff. My wife helps me every week to clean up my yard. I haven't seen a Brockton public work truck on my street since I've lived here. I called them to pick up 10 bags of trash. I said it at the budget meeting. There was needles, drugs, condoms, everything behind my house. They sit there and do their bullshit. I have cameras on my house. I called the police. You know what they told me? We can't do nothing about it. What are you talking about? They can't do traffic control. They can't pick up calls to come to my house and take care of shit when I pay my taxes. That's all I gotta say. Let's straighten this shit out. Rip up the old checkbook. Let's start with a new checkbook. All right? The BS is done. Let's stop chasing 10 million here, 10 million there. Let's stop. Like my dad told me, an old Irish guy told me, if you can't feed your family, get the fuck out of the house.
All right, all right. I appreciate your passion, but this is a mixed crowd, so I would just ask you respectfully to use appropriate language. But you made a lot of good points. And again, I do appreciate your passion. So let me start. There's a lot to unpack there. But let me start with the first question that you had about the city being in debt. Let me make it clear, every community in Massachusetts by law has to have a balanced budget every year. Any debt that we have is based on a deliberate and very public attempt to go into debt, to borrow money, to build things. And it's a great segue. So we're preparing right now to go before the city council and then all of you to ask to borrow up to $350 million to either build new or renovate that high school. We're in what's called right now the feasibility study that will determine the answer to that question. I think the conventional wisdom, everybody thinks we're probably going to renovate on site, but the law requires us to do a thorough analysis. As to the other points, that's why all of you are here. I'm glad that you come to the budget meetings because that's when you have your say. That's when the city council reacts to that proposal by the mayor. I try to be accessible. I know I've worked for 3 different mayors since I've been here. All 3 of them have worked very hard to be accessible and accept people coming into the office and sharing priorities like that. I've worked in small towns and I work now in a large city. And that is always a challenge. It's difficult, the way governments are funded here in Massachusetts, to meet every priority. And so there's always going to be things that we can improve on. And that's just me being honest as a career public servant. But I can tell you, most of the people, I would say almost all of the people that I encounter that work for the city on a daily basis are dedicated and passionate, and they really care. So there are ways for you citizens to communicate when you see things like potholes and needles. And I've gotten to know the Director of Public Works pretty well. In my experience, Public Works is one of the toughest things in government because there's always something you could be doing. There's always roads that need improving. There's the need for clean, safe drinking water never ends. It's a challenge here as much as it is anywhere else. So again, I appreciate the passion, but that's why we do the work that we do every day to try to address as many of those needs as we can. But I would encourage you, and I mean this, come into my office and sit down, and I would love to just get into the details with you about the resources that we spend in that budget and how we allocate them.
And the gentleman is right. We spend predominantly the schools. They spend at least $300,000 a year on Amazon. My concern, and I'm on the accounts committee, is who's ordering it, where is it being delivered, and I just want to make sure that what we are purchasing from Amazon, we can't purchase locally, because we should try to take care of local businesses that employ people. So he's quite right. There are a menu of issues that I think we can do so much better on, and we really need to focus on that. We can't be complacent about it. And I thank you for coming in, Clancy.
Jamal.
Hi, I want to say my name's Jamal Brathwaite, and thank you, Troy, and thank you, Farwell, for hosting this event. I really love these engagements. But piggybacking on what Clancy was asking about, and just kind of simplifying this, is that so the investigation had about 22 recommendations to the city. Those are related to what are called internal control deficiencies. Does the city track those deficiencies with remediation plan or remediation owner? And if so, like who's tracking that so we know when the deficiencies are remediated? Does the city council have visibility?
The simple answer is yes. Right after the Nystrom, Beckham, and Paris report was released, I had a member of my team actually create a spreadsheet that tracks each of those recommendations. Many of them have been implemented. I will say this to you, The new administration at the Brockton Public Schools is responsive and engaged. We work very closely. I work very closely with Dr. Tehliani and her team, and the level of collaboration that I've seen in the last several months is outstanding. And so, you know, there were practices there that needed to be changed, and they are being changed. You know, not a contract gets signed without a signature of both the superintendent and the mayor. The position control, which was a big challenge that led to the deficit, meaning hiring people without accountability, has been fixed. And so the way people are hired and the documentation that exists for those hires has changed. And that's why you wound up with a $7 million surplus in the face of a significant deficit, because those controls were put in place.
So, just if I can follow, so the next question is that, so I was looking at that, like, the monthly Brockton Public School expense tracker that you guys were talking about earlier. I agree, it looks great, it's a really good model. And when I was looking at it line by line item, I noticed there was a line called, a financial statement line item called audit. And the amount was zero. And it appears I read there's like $0 spent on auditing in Brockton Public Schools. So I'm just curious to know, like, how do we get insurance over the controls that exist over Brockton Public School budget if there's, I don't know, like, is there any auditing being performed over Brockton Public Schools because the line item's at zero? Or, I was just trying to understand that.
Yeah, if you look in the city's budget, you'll see a similar line and a pretty significant expense in that line. And so that is for the outside auditor that the city employs every year. And those outside auditors not only review the city budget and the city spending, but also the schools. So that absolutely is occurring. But again, in addition to that, there have been several different working groups that have been set up, and I don't mean just ones where people talk too much, actual clear measurable goals of how we improve the workflow of how we do things here that have resulted in not only cost savings, but improved efficiencies and just a better way of conducting our business. I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything's perfect. In an organization this large, you know, in my early days when I first came here, I'm a fan of Broadway musicals, and I love the musical Fiddler on the Roof. And you know, at the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye comes out and he says, you can define our village in one word. Anyone know what it is? Tradition, right? I used to call Brockton tradition because so much was done. Because remember, Brockton was not always a city, right? It was part of the town of Bridgewater. It was right? It was North Bridgewater for a long time. But before that, it was part of the town of Bridgewater. And I think in many, but that's true. But in many ways, the DNA of this community is still that of a small town. And a lot of the ways work gets done is by those traditions, passed on from generation to generation of city workers. And so, and homes, that's a really good point, right? Generations of families live in their ancestral homes, and I think that's awesome. That is not the best way to run a $500 million organization. So one of the things we've tried to do, and again, certainly in my tenure here, and the 3 mayors with whom I've worked, to try to modernize an organization this large is kind of like turning an aircraft carrier, right? A lot of those systems you don't change overnight. But we've made vast improvements over the years, and we continue to make vast improvements. Just today, we have a new Human Resources Director, Sandra Knight. Some of you might recognize that name. She was with us before. She left and came back. She is a Brockton resident. You know, we met today, and we had a 2.5-page list of things that we want to focus on with her about process improvement and how we do our work better. So I assure you, Jamal, that work is ongoing every day, and you know, you've sat in my office, and we've talked to you. Let me give an example. Jamal called me a couple of years ago and was concerned about the way that your properties were valued and assessed. Because there's not a lot of information out there about how that happens, right? So your assessment is $100,000 this year and it's $120,000 next year, but then you go and look at Wynn's house and his house didn't go up as much, and so you say, well, the fix is in, you know, somebody must have given Wynn a break. That's not how it works. But it's easy to see when you look at those numbers across the board, sometimes it doesn't make sense. But the way properties are valued and assessed is very complex, and it's done on a very broad basis. And so, to Jamal's credit, he came in and sat down with me and the assessor. We explained how that process works. And I'd like to think that he left understanding a little better, but more importantly, having a little more faith in his local officials, because we took the time to explain how stuff gets done. And that is available to all of you.
Appreciate that. Can I just ask one last question?
Sure, then I'll get to you, Ulysses.
Great. I want to pick up on a point this young lady mentioned about nepotism, and specifically there's something called having an anti-nepotism policy. I'm curious to know, does the city of Brockton have it? I just want to define what it is, just for people who don't know. An anti-nepotism policy is a set of guidelines an organization uses to prevent favoritism and conflicts of interest arising from family relationships or connections in the workplace, ensuring fair and merit-based employee practices. I'm just curious, do we have an anti-nepotism policy? And if we do, who monitors compliance with that policy?
So there's a law in place, actually, that the city follows. It's called General Laws Chapter 268A. It's called the Conflict of Interest Law, actually. And so, yes, it's rigorously followed in the city, and each and every employee in the city on an annual basis has to not only take training, but certify that they've taken that training so that they're aware of the limitations as it relates to nepotism and what they call self-dealing. Ulysses. Yeah, and then Jamie. Well, I don't know. I mean, you can test me if you'd like.
This thinking out loud. While I attended a Brockton residential, this information is very valuable. I've worked in government my whole life, and government works best when there's a check and a balance. And the public provides the check. So maybe this is me planting a seed, but having this information in two forms, one that's easily digestible to the public, because we all have different educational levels, and then a more detailed version so people can dive in. I think if we're going to move forward, we're all coming together to decide how we want to relate to one another. And I think that's very important, and that's a good thing. Something beautiful hopefully will come on. We need the information, we need the tools in order to do that. So we hope that this information be disclosed to the public, be readily available, and again, easily digestible. These are very important, and I think this is kind of why I wanted to get into politics and government. This is grassroots level, and it's very difficult in order to we're coming together as government. It's not an easy task. So I want to see more of this, and hopefully, like I said, good from us. The other thing that I want to I know how I am with my personal finances and how I do debt, and I don't like it. But I know debt in the business world is it's good. Something that is not debt. So it hurts increased costs of the public safety. And I'm just, part of me is scared and nervous about the future. I don't want Brockton to lose, we're talking about the future of Brockton. I don't want Brockton to lose that flexibility. So, unforeseen, why we had, is it, are we looking to pay it off, like, let that get unenforced, or try to put it down as early as possible? Because I don't want to be in a position, like Brockton could talk, I don't want to be in a position where we're not able to take advantage of other opportunities for school being one. So if you could speak to that.
Sure. Great question. And for those of you that didn't hear, the overarching question was, how are we managing our debt? how are we looking at that extra $48 million for the public safety building against the backdrop of an upcoming $700 million high school project and all the other things that we're building and buying? Is that a good synopsis, Ulysses, what you said? And so it's a great question, and the answer is we are actually looking at it in its totality. I just last week convened a working group of every city in town has a financial advisor. In our case, it's called Hilltop Securities. So they advise us on debt management. As I said before, when debt goes out to market, there's a company that underwrites that debt. They literally take it to market. We have actuaries. We have financial professionals that are interested. And so I've convened a working group to take a look at the entirety of the city's debt and to try to plan it out for the next 30 years, because we have this massive project that's looming in a few years. And our intent is to go to the voters, it's not set in stone, but probably in November of 2026 or sometime around then, and ask all of you, are you willing to raise above Proposition 2.5 the amount necessary to build a high school? Now, so what we're doing right now, and what you'll see very soon and very publicly, is an analysis of our debt, because that pension debt that I told you about a little while ago, that's going to get paid off in 2036. Sounds like a long time away, but it's not, right? It's 2025. If it takes 2 years to design this high school, and it takes 3 to 4 to 5 years to build it, right? That's 7 years. We're already at 2032. So what we're trying to do is manage all of that debt so that when the debt retires from the pension project in 2036, we then can apply the new debt for the high school, and so that the net impact on you, the taxpayers, isn't $350 million, but it's closer to $50 million. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to put out information that tells you exactly what that means for you personally. One of the things I've done before in other places where I've worked, we're going to create a calculator, and it's going to be on the city's website. So you can go and find out what the assessed value of your home is and punch it into this calculator, and it's going to tell you exactly what your responsibility, what your taxes are going to be, and what the increase is going to be if you support this high school. I would submit to you that if we can build a brand new high school, and Brockton deserves that, and have that net impact be that low because we're effectively managing our debt, then that's an investment that's worth it to make. And I understand, and I've been told, and it's true, you know, it's easy for me to stand before you. I don't live in this city, so I'm not going to have to pay that extra money. That's a fair criticism. So lots of people are going to say it in the next couple of years, so I'll just put it right out there. That is absolutely true, but I can assure you that every mayor that I've worked for and whomever is elected to take over in January, their top priority will be keeping this city affordable for all of you, and that's the mandate that I follow every day. And the last thing in answer to your first statements is all of the information that we discussed tonight is available on the website on the city's finance page, but and the information that we provide to the council, those reports that Councillor Farwell was discussing, those are all public documents, and I'm happy to share them with anyone that wants them. But I'm also willing to listen to suggestions on how we can improve even more on how we share information. Hold on one second, in the back. Couple more? So the question related to the Lopes lawsuit that was settled several years ago, and as part of that settlement, there was a requirement for the city to conduct training. And so, to paraphrase the question, is that training ongoing? Of what does it consist? And the answer is yes. One of the steps that was taken in the wake of that settlement was the hiring and screening process was automated. There's actually a software called Interview Exchange that the city now uses. And so there's electronic documentation of who applied, who was interviewed, who got hired. And so there's actual information that's maintained on that process, so that the process is much more formal than it was before. In addition, as part of the settlement, and I think so I'm going from memory now, but I think the settlement required it to go for 3 years, but Mayor Sullivan has continued that. So there is an appropriation that's approved by the City Council in the HR budget every year for $150,000 for training. And there's been training on a whole variety of issues, customer service training, all kinds of specific training that the HR office has conducted. I'm happy to get a list for you. I'm just off the top of my head, not thinking of all of the different ones, but even to the department level, we've had defensive driving training for the police officers. Good point Wynn just made. We all have to take a state ethics exam every year, even the city councilors, to understand the requirements of nepotism in Chapter 268A, and have to then certify and provide information to the city clerk, and he tracks who's taken that. So, that settlement did produce a lot of good positive results that continue today.